Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about a sacrifice, the kind of grand, public gesture of love that poets and fools write about. I was, for a time, both. I was a man who stood at the absolute pinnacle of my world, a king in a kingdom of whispers and power, and I willingly, gladly, stepped off the throne and into the shadows to save my queen. I took the bullet that was meant for us both, and I wore the scar as a badge of honor, a testament to a love that was more important than any ambition. For 5 years, I lived in the quiet, noble satisfaction of that sacrifice, watching her rise, powered by my fall. This story is about the day I decided to trace the path of that bullet, to follow its trajectory back in time, not to the hand of an enemy, but to the hand of the very person I had been shielding with my own body. It's about the horrifying discovery that my grand sacrifice was not a choice I had made, but a carefully engineered assassination of my life, orchestrated by the one person I had been trying to save. My world was a game played with shadows and information. I was a strategist, a man who moved the pieces on a political chessboard. My name was a byword for a certain kind of ruthless efficiency. I wasn't the one in the spotlight. I was the one who aimed the spotlight. I built careers, I shaped narratives, and I won. Always. My life was a fortress of my own design, and she was its co-ruler. She was my partner in every sense of the word, my intellectual equal, my strategic sounding board. She was the one person who saw the full map, who understood the complex, often ugly, mechanics of the world we inhabited. Our partnership was a perfect, beautiful machine, fueled by a shared ambition and a deep, profound, and I believed, unshakable love. We were untouchable. The scandal, when it came, was a masterpiece of political destruction. It wasn't a crime, nothing so simple or so crude. It was a leak. A single, confidential strategy memo I had written, a document so cynical, so brutally honest in its assessment of our tactics, that its public release was the equivalent of a nuclear detonation. It was a look behind the curtain, a glimpse into the ugly kitchen where the beautiful meals of public policy were made. And it was career-ending. The memo was a bomb and I was ground zero, but the blast radius was large. It threatened to consume not just me, but her as well. Her career, which we had been carefully, meticulously building, was on the verge of a major breakthrough. She was being groomed for a public role, a position of real influence. The scandal would have tainted her by association, the poison of my name seeping into her future. The decision in the chaotic, frantic hours after the leak felt like the only one a man in my position could make. It was a simple, brutal calculation of love. My career was already over. Hers was just beginning. One of us had to survive, so I chose her. I fell on my sword. I took full, sole responsibility. I became the villain of the story. I issued a statement of resignation, a carefully worded piece of prose that painted me as a lone wolf, a rogue agent whose toxic philosophy was his alone. I built a firewall around her, using the wreckage of my own reputation as the bricks and mortar. I walked into the fire willingly and completely so that she could walk away, clean and untouched, into the future we had planned for her. The day I announced my public execution, she held me, her face a perfect, beautiful mask of tragic love. She told me I was the most honorable man she had ever known. She told me my sacrifice was a testament to a love she would spend the rest of her life trying to deserve. I believed her. I felt a strange, clean peace in my own destruction. I had lost the game, but I had saved my queen. And in the silent, empty life that stretched out before me, that single, noble act was the only thing I had left to cling to. My new life was an exercise in erasure. I became a ghost, a recluse in my own home. My name was a curse, a punchline in the very circles I had once dominated. I unplugged from the world, my only connection to the game being her, and I poured all of my thwarted ambition, all of my strategic genius into her. I became the man behind the woman, the secret, unseen engine of her meteoric rise. It was a perfect, if painful, new partnership. I would spend my days in quiet, monkish study, analyzing the political landscape, and at night I would give her my strategies, my talking points, my insights. I wrote her speeches. I prepped her for interviews. I was the ghostwriter for the next chapter of her life. And she was a brilliant student, a flawless executor of our shared plans. Her career didn't just survive, it flourished. Freed from the shadow of my toxic reputation, she became a star. She was hailed as a new, fresh voice, a woman of integrity and sharp, insightful intellect. Her rise was a thing of beauty, a perfect, soaring arc, and her success was my only solace. It was the justification for my sacrifice. I had not died in vain. I had died so that she could live, and her life was becoming more glorious than I could have ever imagined. I would watch her on television, a secret, proud smile on my face, and I would hear my own words coming from her mouth, polished and perfected by her own unique brilliance. We were still a team, I told myself. A secret team, but a team nonetheless. But as the years went on, a subtle, almost imperceptible distance began to grow between us. The late-night strategy sessions became less frequent. She was busy. She had a new circle of advisors, of powerful friends, of people who could be seen with her in public. I was a secret, a liability, a ghost she could only consult in the dead of night. The gratitude, which had once been a warm, constant presence in our home, began to feel practiced. Her words of thanks for my help started to sound like the lines in a play she had memorized. Our partnership was changing. I was no longer the co-ruler of a shared kingdom. I was a tool, a valuable but hidden asset in her new solo empire. I told myself this was the price of my sacrifice. This was the cost of her success. I had chosen this life, this role. My loneliness, my growing sense of irrelevance, was a small price to pay for her brilliant future. But the man I used to be, the strategist who saw patterns and calculated risks, was not entirely dead. And he was beginning to notice that the story, as he had understood it, had a few, small but persistent, plot holes. The first was a conversation I overheard. She was on the phone in her office, her voice a low, confidential murmur, but the door was ajar. She was talking to a journalist, a powerful, influential columnist who had been one of her earliest and most ardent champions. And I heard her say something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "No," she was saying, a soft, confident laugh in her voice. "The initial leak wasn't a risk. It was an investment, the best one I ever made." And then she saw me in the doorway, and her face went blank for a fraction of a second before she smiled, a bright, beautiful, dismissive smile, and she ended the call. "Just talking strategy," she had said, a little too quickly. "An investment. The leak that had destroyed my life, that had ended my career, that had turned me into a pariah." She had called it an investment. I tried to make it make sense. It was a metaphor, a dark piece of political humor. She meant that the outcome, her success, was so great that it had retroactively made the initial disaster a worthwhile price to pay. But the word, the cold, clinical, strategic word, investment, echoed in my mind. It was the language of a strategist, not a victim. It was the language I used to use. It was a single, loose thread in the perfect, tragic tapestry of our shared history. And the ghost of the man I used to be, the man who knew that a single loose thread could unravel everything, could not resist the urge to pull. My investigation was a quiet, secret act of treason against the life I had chosen. I felt like a man desecrating a tomb, my own tomb. I had built my new identity on the foundation of my noble sacrifice, and now I was digging into that foundation, looking for the cracks. I had to know what she had meant by that single, chilling word, investment. I was a man with nothing but time and a particular set of skills, the skills of a hunter. I had been out of the game for 5 years, but the instincts, the knowledge of how the shadows worked were still there. I started where all such hunts begin. I went back to the beginning. I went back to the leak. The official story, the one the world believed, the one I believed, was that the memo had been leaked by a rival, a political enemy looking to destroy me. The investigation at the time had been inconclusive, a series of dead ends and digital ghosts, but technology had changed in 5 years, and I was a man with a singular, obsessive focus. I started with the digital breadcrumbs of the original leak. I hired through a discreet third party a team of cybersecurity experts, the kind of people who don't ask questions and who can navigate the darkest corners of the internet. I told them I was a researcher, writing a book on political scandals. I gave them the date, the time, and the name of the journalist who had first received the memo. I asked them to do what the original investigators could not, to trace the leak back to its source. The source of the Nile, the origin of a river. The days I spent waiting for their report were a strange, surreal limbo. I was living a double life. By day, I was the supportive, invisible husband, giving her my insights, my advice, my love. By night, I was a man consumed by a single, terrifying question, a man who was beginning to suspect that the entire geography of his life was a lie. The report arrived in a series of encrypted files. It was a masterpiece of digital forensics. The experts had peeled back the layers of the onion, tracing the memo's path through a series of anonymous servers, encrypted relays, and false IP addresses. They had followed the ghost through the machine, and they had found it, the source, the origin of the river. The leak had not come from a rival's office. It had not come from a foreign agent. It had originated from a small, private, high-security laptop. A laptop that had been routed through a university library's public Wi-Fi, a clever, almost untraceable move, but they had traced it. They had found a digital fingerprint, a unique hardware ID, and the report included the registered owner of that specific, unique piece of hardware. I stared at the name on the screen, and the world did not just tilt. It dissolved into a meaningless black void. The name was hers. The leak had come from inside the house. I sat there, the screen glowing in the dark, and the last 5 years of my life rearranged themselves into a new, monstrous shape. The scandal had not been an attack on us. It had been an attack on me. My downfall had not been a tragic consequence she had to endure. It had been the strategic objective she had flawlessly executed. The firewall I had built around her was a lie. I had not been shielding her from the fire. I had been the fire, and she had been the one who had lit the match. My sacrifice was not a sacrifice. It was a murder, and she had been the beautiful, grieving widow who had inherited the kingdom. Her rise had not been a phoenix-like ascent from the ashes of our shared tragedy. It had been a simple, brutal, and brilliantly executed coup. She had seen that my brand of politics, my ruthless, behind-the-scenes maneuvering, was becoming a liability in a changing world. She had seen that her brand, the public-facing, charismatic, and seemingly authentic leader, was the future. She could not rise while she was tied to me. I was the anchor holding her back. So she had cut the rope. She had created the crisis that had necessitated my noble sacrifice. She had not just allowed me to fall on my sword. She had manufactured the sword, sharpened it, and pointed me in the right direction. My love for her, my instinct to protect her, was not a surprise to her. It was the central, predictable variable in her entire calculation. She had known I would sacrifice myself for her, and she had used that love, the purest, best part of me, as the primary weapon in my own destruction. The ghost of the man I used to be, the cold, ruthless strategist, looked at the evidence, and he felt a single, chilling emotion. It was not anger. It was not heartbreak. It was a profound and terrible sense of professional admiration. The confrontation was not an act of passion. It was a strategic debriefing. I was a general who had finally, belatedly, understood the full, brilliant scope of his opponent's campaign. I waited for the right moment, a quiet evening when the world was not watching, when the masks were off. She was in her study, the room that was once our shared war room, now her solitary throne room. I walked in and I did not speak. I simply placed a single, printed sheet of paper on the desk in front of her. It was the final page of the cybersecurity report, the page with the hardware ID of her laptop and her name. She looked down at the paper. Her face, which had been relaxed, confident, the face of a woman at the absolute peak of her power, did not change. It simply sharpened. Her eyes, which had been looking at a speech she was editing, lifted and met mine. And in them I saw no fear, no guilt, no remorse. I saw only the cool, calm, and slightly impatient assessment of a CEO whose subordinate has just uncovered a confidential but ultimately necessary piece of corporate strategy. It was an investment, I said, my voice a quiet, dead thing. That was the word you used. Now I understand the prospectus. She leaned back in her chair, a slow, deliberate movement. She did not deny it. She did not try to lie. To do so would have been an insult to us both. We were two strategists at a table, and the game was, finally, out in the open. It was the only move, she said, her voice a calm, rational explanation of a complex but logical maneuver. You were a king from a bygone era. Your kind of power, the power in the shadows, was becoming obsolete. The world wants authenticity now, or at least the appearance of it. They want a face, a story. Your story was over. Mine was just beginning. I couldn't write it while I was still a character in yours. Her words were not a confession. They were a justification, a final, brutal lesson in the new politics she had mastered. She had not betrayed me. She had simply made a necessary strategic pivot. So you destroyed me, I said. You took my life, my name, my future, and you used it as the kindling for your own fire. I didn't destroy you, she said, and for the first time there was a flicker of something, perhaps a genuine, if condescending, form of pity in her eyes. I liberated you. You were trapped in that game just as I was. You were tired of it. I saw it in your eyes for years. I gave you what you secretly wanted, a way out, an honorable discharge. The audacity of her psychological analysis, the sheer narcissistic brilliance of her reframing of my assassination as an act of mercy was breathtaking. She had not just taken my life, she was now trying to take my own understanding of it. And your grief, I asked. Your tears. The years you spent telling me how much my sacrifice meant to you. What was that? Just part of the performance. It was good strategy, she said, without a trace of irony. It was important that you believed in the narrative. Your belief was what made it real. It was what gave me the moral authority I needed to rise. In that moment, the woman I had loved, the partner I had trusted, the queen I had sacrificed my kingdom for, vanished. In her place was a creature of pure, beautiful, and utterly terrifying ambition. She was a perfect machine, a flawless strategist who had calculated every angle except for one. She had assumed that the man she had killed would stay dead. "And what now?" she asked, her voice taking on a new, practical tone. The strategic analysis was over. Now it was time for the negotiation. "Do you plan to go public, to create a new scandal? It will destroy you as much as it will destroy me. You will look like a bitter, vengeful man, a ghost trying to drag the living back into the grave with him." "No," I said, and I felt a strange, cold smile touch my own lips. "I have no interest in destroying you. You are my greatest creation, after all." I looked at her, at the powerful, influential woman she had become, and I saw not my wife but my masterpiece. She had used my strategies, my words, my mind. She was the vessel. I had been the architect. "The game isn't over," I said, my voice a low, quiet promise. "We've just entered a new phase. You're the one in the spotlight now, but I'm still the one who knows how the lights work." I turned and walked out of her office, leaving her sitting there for the first time in 5 years with a look of genuine, profound uncertainty on her face. The war was not over. It had just gone cold. The loving husband was dead. The noble sacrificer was a fiction. But the strategist, the kingmaker, the man who knew how to play the long game from the deepest, darkest shadows, had just been resurrected. And he was ready to play. "Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today."